mean, my dream because I quit my job and walked away from my pension as a police officer when I was 40 to give this another try. My goal was if I could ever just make as much as what I would have made had I stayed and gone on pension, then it'll be a wash, right? Well, I far surpassed that. But while I was in there, just kind of and watching the sales go up, and I was mentally crunching the numbers because this was November, and I thought, holy, you know what? I'm going to make over $250,000 this year as an artist.
You have found Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. Downloadable audio episodes can be found in the podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. We are locally underwritten by the Bank of Sun Prairie, Calls on Call Extraordinary Answering Service, as well as the Bold Business Book. And today we're welcoming / preparing to learn from Tim Packer of Tim Packer Art Academy. I'm excited we get to talk about art, Tim. So how are you feeling today, Tim?
I'm feeling great. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for having me on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited because I don't know if you know this or not, but I majored in graphic design.
Oh, me too.
Way back when. I don't do anything with it now. But,
yeah.
And I just got back from Italy, and it was interesting because I'm like, wait a second. I've actually painted and drawn this cathedral.
Yeah.
And I just never knew where it was.
So. Oh, this is going to be a lot of fun then, because there's going to be a lot of context on your end, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions as well, which is
probably.
Cool. Yeah.
So let's start with the foundation. What is Tim Packer Art Academy?
Okay, it's my online art academy, and there's a lot of like recorded courses where people pay just for a certain course. They can get my color and composition course or see how I paint the subjects that I paint, or I have like whole suites of programs on there. And then I also have like a mastermind program. I call it the Hungry Artist Community. And that's where they get all of my courses. Plus every week I do a live Zoom call from the students. It's basically from around the world, but I'll critique their paintings. I'll answer any questions they have about art or the business of being an artist, and I'll give them coaching advice.
So is the idea, I guess most of your students, are they looking to do art just as a hobby, or are they looking to do it as a professional?
Yeah, that's my niche. I am a very successful artist. I've had a really successful career as an artist, as a self-publisher, kind of ran my own gallery. But what I really want to do now is my new mission in life is sharing the lessons and the knowledge that I've acquired over 25 years of being a full-time professional artist with other people who share that dream, where their dream is they want to be able to actually make a livable income from their art. And that's a huge void. The universities and colleges are failing them just miserably. And also most of the common wisdom that's out there is actually just plain wrong, that I've found in my experience. And so not only was I successful, but I ended up mentoring a young artist back in 2017. She was just a daughter of a friend of mine that I golfed with, she was taking landscape architecture, but she really liked to paint, and she did it as a hobby. And I got to know her. First of all, we did a small print job for her of a painting she'd done for her grandfather, and she wanted to do prints for like neighbors on the cottage road. And over her last couple of years of school, I got to know her, and she would always be picking my brains about art. And then after she graduated, I was golfing with her dad, and he said, well, yeah, Brooke spoke to us last night. And I said, oh, how is she? And he said, well, she doesn't want to be a landscape architect, apparently, after a 4-year university program. She wants to be an artist. And he wasn't happy, and he wasn't happy with me. And he was just, if you could have had a thought bubble above his head, it's all your fault.
Oh no!
And because every time we got together, she would she would meet at social functions at the club, and she golfed a few times with me and her dad, but she was always picking my brains about art and about being an artist. And she knew too, like my background, I grew up wanting to be an artist. I took graphic design, like I just found out you did as well. And then by the time I was 21, realized I'm just not talented enough to make a living as an artist. The Toronto Police Force was hiring, and that was an 18-year career that I did as a Toronto police officer before I discovered the whole idea of the growth mindset. So if you're I guess I should let your listeners know too, if they're hoping for a quick story of how I went from being a kid who liked to draw to where I am now, it's not there. But anyway, she knew my story. And so she knew that I knew. And by the time I met her, I was a very successful artist. So I said to her, dad, I said, listen, she's just graduated. She's young. She's living at home. She doesn't have any debt. If there's ever a time to take a chance on this, it's now. And I already had my YouTube channel that I was doing, which was all directed at just free content for helping artists who want to make a living from their art. And I said, if she's willing and wants me to mentor her, I'd be willing to mentor her over the next couple of years, as long as she's willing to have all of our sessions filmed and have it go up on YouTube. So we did that in 2017 to 2019. And now she is a worldwide superstar.
Is she really?
She's got over 1 million followers on social media. She's living in Vienna right now. Her work sells around the world. Her work sells for much more than mine. She's got a much, and most artists, there was a recent study, is that most artists in North America who are full-time artists make less than $10,000 a year in their net income. And she did 30,000 in that first year that I was mentoring her. Now, I don't know what she's at, but it's a lot. And so that kind of reinforced to me that, okay, I can help people. And I knew that I wasn't gifted, right? I was not the most talented, most naturally talented person in any class that I took. I was always kind of maybe just above the middle. And then in 2019, I contracted Graves' disease. I almost died twice. I was kind of lying in the gurney with my wife, not really knowing if I was going to survive the next 10 or 15 minutes. And that was kind of a life-changing moment for me in a couple ways. The first thing, the great thing about that, again, I'm fine now. I'm healthier than I've ever been. But, you'd think what a lot of emotions might run through your head when you're lying there thinking, I don't know if I'm going to be here in 5 or 10 minutes. And for me, it wasn't fear. It wasn't terror. It wasn't regret. It was gratitude. I just really, I can vividly remember both those times just thinking, hey, like, whatever's up there, whoever's up there, if this is it, okay, I'm really not ready to go. But if it is, thank you so much for allowing me to live the life that I'd led. I got to achieve the dreams that I had as a child and way beyond my wildest dreams. And then over the course of that year, while I was sick, and the other thing that was really cool is I thought at the time, I thought I have no regrets. There's, a lot of people, I know Gary Vaynerchuk talks all the time. He says, go visit old people. You'll see what poison regret can be like for not trying the thing that you wanted to try. And I realized I didn't have any regrets, but over the course of that year, I realized there was one regret that I did still sort of have. And so, I'd been doing my YouTube channel at that point for about 7 years, but it had been just a passion project, no intent to monetize. My money was being made just off cranking out paintings, selling them to collectors, doing my limited edition prints, all that kind of stuff. But the regret that I had was that I really hadn't helped as many artists as I had hoped. I thought if I just put the YouTube channel up there, I'll get millions of followers and I'll help all these artists. And that didn't happen. I think that time I had about 5,000 YouTube followers. And then I just really decided over the course of that year, I just kind of, realized that what I really wanted to focus the next session of my life on, if I got healthy again, was really sharing everything that I'd learned and helping change other artists' lives like I'd been able to do with Brooke. And so in 2020, that's when we launched the Tim Packer Art Academy. And that's now the main focus of my business. I still get in the studio and paint. I was actually painting this morning, and so I made good money there. We still do limited reproductions of my work that we sell across North America, and that's going good. But my main focus right now is on the academy, on dealing with the students and growing the academy, and then filming more and more courses, and then putting out YouTube content as well, which is, we found, is our most effective way of me actually kind of getting known by people and using that to drive them to the Art Academy if that's something they're interested in.
That is cool. So, man, Tim, you shared a huge story there. So let me ask you a few questions.
Yes.
The dad of the daughter, when you go golfing with them now, do you have the little thought bubble that's like,
I'm a rock star in their world. And it was so funny. Every time for about that first year, every time we'd end up at like there could be a golf event and the dinner afterwards. After a few drinks, he would always pigeonhole me, and he's like, "Are you sure? Are you sure she should be doing this?" And then after the first year, I remember at the end of her first year, and I was talking with Brooke. I mean, her name's Brooke Cormier, by the way. And so she's on Instagram at brookecormier.com. But anyways, if your listeners want to check her out, again, like I say, she's just killing it. But after the first year, one of our sessions, I was asking her, "So is your dad on board yet?" Right. And she said, "Well, I'm pretty sure, because at the Christmas dinner, he dominated the entire Christmas dinner with the big extended family, just bragging about her and bragging about her success."
Oh,
And
that's
so,
awesome.
and so now when I see them, her mom especially, she's like, there's not a time goes by when I don't see them where she doesn't pull me aside and just say thank you. Because I can't imagine as a parent, there's anything you want more than your child achieving their dreams, right?
Right.
And he was afraid she was going to end up starving at a garret. I mean, I guess he's probably still a little ticked off at me because she's moved to Vienna. She's living in Vienna now, and they're from the Toronto area in Canada. But she's just living life on her terms. And now with the Art Academy, I've actually had a number of other students that have had similar type success. And a lot of them who are kind of on their way. So yeah, it's been very exciting.
That is incredible. Tell me, so I have to apologize because I don't know the art world
Yep.
at all. I mean, you go to a coffee shop, you see some random paintings and stuff like that. There are definitely art galleries and stuff like that, but I have to admit I haven't been to one of those of any where there's local artists or something like that. I guess, like I said, I was in Italy recently, but then you're looking at
historical
old paintings.
Yeah.
You're not looking at something that was painted last year or even 5 years ago. You're looking at hundreds of years ago. So what is the art world like now for someone that's, let's say, less than 100 years old?
That's a great question. And that's something that is part of the key reason why I think so many artists are starving and failing, because there's no one art world. There's like a bunch of different art villages. And you know that because you and I both went through the one art village, which is graphic design, where the idea is you are going to be a hired gun creating visual products for a client, right? I mean, I went through graphic design before computers, so it was all done by hand, but you are basically, you're there working for an ad agency, or you're working for a client, you're working freelance, but you're doing stuff specifically, mainly to do with marketing, business, package design, whatever. That's one art village. The other art village is the village of publicly funded galleries and most or a lot of universities, which is dominated by postmodernism. That's the whole idea that, what's key is what the artist felt, right? That's the world of meat dresses, invisible art exhibits, installations where it's just a teenager's bed made up with, empty, cigarette butts around and ashtrays, whatever that world. There's the blue chip art gallery, which is the, Sotheby's, the auction houses where paintings are being sold for millions of dollars. And then there's the world of commercial sales, which is, I think, where most artists, when we start out, is ideally where we want to end up, I think. And that is the village where you get to go into your studio every day, paint the work that you love, and real people buy your work to hang in their homes or to hang in their offices. And enough people love your work that you can generate enough money to make a good living, or in my case, a very good living, and actually, start building wealth. But that's the village that I'm in. And the problem is there's very little out there for artists that want to succeed in that village in terms of, well, how do we go about that? What are the rules in that village? Who are the gatekeepers? What type of art kind of, is popular in that village? And they end up, often what happens, they take a fine art degree where it's teaching postmodernism and everything else. And then they go out and they start doing art festivals. Well, there's no art critics at art festivals. There's real people looking for work that they want to hang on their walls. And the thing is that the average person, and studies have borne this out, over the last 75 years, despite the art intelligentsia trying to push postmodernism down people's throats as this is what you should appreciate, the vast majority of people still appreciate everything that was important and valued in art since the Enlightenment, right? So the ability to draw, the painting techniques, composition, light and shadow, beauty, right? I mean, Picasso kind of did us all a disservice when he did Demoiselle Avignon, which was those prostitutes. It was like, oh, art could be ugly. And all of a sudden now we've got to the point where if you're talking about museums and critics, art has to be ugly. Art shouldn't be beautiful, right? And then you see that a lot if you go into like the publicly funded galleries. And the thing is, like, they're not my village. I don't care what those people think. I don't care about critics. I don't care about museum creators. I care about real people who value beauty, craft, expertise, all of those kinds of things, and who love my work and are willing to pay me a lot of money for my work. And so that's the village within the art world that I've been very successful in pretty much every aspect of it. And then I really feel a responsibility to kind of share that, because I know so many artists out there that would just love to have the life that I live, but they have no idea how to get there. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, it's interesting because you think of any art, whether it's dance or painting, even I'm thinking of people that do pinstriping on cars and stuff like that. There's an artist mentality, and you can be really good at that, but to know the business of it,
Yes.
that's a whole different game.
And we're not typically known for our business acumen, right? So I'm a
No,
bit of a
well,
unicorn. I'm a bit of a
most
unicorn
professionals
in
aren't.
that. No, but I run my own. Like I was with Mill Pond Press, which is one of the biggest fine art publishers. When I initially broke out with my style of work that became very popular, they were publishing me, and I realized after the first year, like, they did $100,000 in sales of my work, and I got about $5,000 commission, and I was like, well, I'm not happy with that. And I understood the model too, because my dad was a head pressman at one of the top printing companies in Toronto. And they used to do a lot of the stuff for Bateman and Trisha Romance and Ken Danby and all these big names. But they were doing print runs of like 25, 35,000 in a limited edition run, and selling the prints, paper prints, for $500, $600, $700, $800. So getting 5% of retail on that was actually pretty good. Like, Bateman made millions of dollars. But what happened is, in the 90s, there was there was a real time when people were buying limited edition prints almost as investments, right?
Oh,
It's like, oh, Robert Bateman's come out with, have you seen his Gray Wolf? And you just couldn't get them, because it was a really cutthroat business where the publishers were saying, okay, if you want Bateman, you got to buy 20 prints for a gallery, or you're not getting his latest. So they would all sell out. And then, of course, the galleries were telling people, well, there's only like 10 prints available. They're selling out, and the prices would actually go up. But people were buying them as investments. And then there was a huge crash in the 90s, and all of a sudden everybody tried to unload their limited edition prints that they'd spent $500, $600, $700 on, and they were just stacked under their beds. And they were getting $50 for them because everybody else was trying to unload their prints.
oh.
And so then people realized, okay, these are not an investment. These are just decor. And then people said, well, if it's going to be limited edition, I want it really limited. And so for me, by the time they picked me up, they were doing 100 prints on canvas of one edition. Now, 5% of 30,000 sales is a lot of money. 5% of only 100 is not very much. And in the old days, you probably know this from your graphic design, like, offset litho was the way to go. Well, that was several $1 million worth of equipment, 10 or 15 skilled tradespeople getting paid a lot of money to be able to produce a limited edition print run. Well, right around, I got my first Giclée printer in around 2005. At that point, all of a sudden, everything was going to Giclée printing, digital, better quality printing, and you could go out and set up from, like, the whole thing, from the camera to the computer to the software to the printer, for $25,000.
Instead of some big Heidelberg press.
Exactly, right? My dad passed away earlier this year, but he used to come over to my house and my gallery all the time, and he just could not believe the quality of the prints. And he was the head pressman at the top fine art printer in Canada, and he said nothing that ever came off his Heidelberg 5-color could touch what I could do on the printer that I had in the front room at my house. Wow. So I started self-publishing. And, you know, like I say, that first year I spent 25 grand in equipment. We did 50,000 in sales that first year. So made the money back on the equipment plus into profit. And there have been times when we were really heavily focusing on pushing the prints. And I was in a number of galleries at that time across Canada and the US that were also marketing my prints. But there was a number of years where I generated over $150,000 a year just off the sale of my prints.
Wow.
And compared to $5,000 when I was being run through the big publishers, right?
Dang. All right.
So
Tell me.
I'm a business guy, which is not usual for
No,
artists, right?
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Tell me a story about the selling of your prints. I'm gonna compare it an artist's print, like, hey, this is a Tim Packer print,
Yeah.
or just like, hey, this is a print of, let's say, trees and leaves, and I like trees and leaves, so I'm gonna chase after that. How many people are going after the name of an artist versus just, I like this particular picture?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both because in this village, let's talk about what's great art, first of all, in this village. And it's very different than what's great art in those other villages I talked about. And in the village of commercial sales, we judge great art by not by what the artist felt, not by how many hours it took them, not even by their name. We judge great art by the impact it has on the viewer. And the impact that we want is people to see the work and go, oh my gosh, I love this work, and if it's a festival, you want them to go, honey, come over here, look at this. We have to have this piece of work, right? You want to garner that biblical emotion of coveting, right? Where they see it and they just go, I want it. Where they make poor decisions or difficult decisions in order to acquire it, right? Where they spend money they really shouldn't spend on it just because they have to have it. Or where, I mean, every show I've ever done, whether it's a gallery show, I used to do a studio open house every year before we moved up to where we are now, where I would invite all my clients to come to my house for a day, and it was a big sale of my work. And I would always have, several people say, well, we'd love to come to your show, but we're just not in a position where we can afford to spend $1,000 or several $1,000 on a print or several $1,000s on a painting. And we feel bad. We're just going to come drink your wine and look at your work. And it's like, fine, come. I don't care. Just come. Because I know inevitably at least one of those couples at a certain point are going to be over in the corner having a conversation that's very uncomfortable. And they're trying to decide how badly they really want to go on that vacation to Florida or wherever, or maybe we should get this painting instead, right? And so it's the number one key to becoming a successful artist is to develop the skills, the knowledge, the experience, creativity to consistently create work that at least enough of the public, a certain percentage, feels that way about your work. And once you can do that, then it's easy. And so for me, it's like, yeah, I sell a lot of prints because a lot of people love my work, but they can't afford, $2,000 for a small original, maybe $17,000 for a large painting, but they can get a big 3 foot by 4 foot print of mine for like $1,200, which you can't really tell the difference from an original because of the quality of the printing, unless you get right up close and look at it. And so for them, it's kind of like, those kind of prints is kind of like fine furniture, right? It's like fine decor. It's not an investment, although, there is the chance that some limited editions may go up in price. But I look at it like, it's like buying a fine piece of furniture. You're buying it because you want that impact in your life, in your home. You want to walk in every day. You want to feel what it makes you feel. Might it turn into an antique? In the case of a piece of furniture, maybe, but that's not why you're buying it. But then with my originals, people are buying them as investments. My work has continually gone up dramatically in price over the last 25 years. And so they know if they buy an original, that is actually, that's both investing in kind of like your home and your surroundings, but it's also going to appreciate in value. So it's kind of like I do have a big following of people but it's mainly because they love my work, right? And it's just like in music, right? The more people that love your work, the more popular you become, the bigger venues you show in, the more they're willing to pay for tickets, and the more they'll buy your CDs, buy your
Crowds
whatever.
attract crowds.
But it all comes, first of all, from being able to create the work that has that emotional reaction from at least enough people, right? And then once you get that, so and in my art academy, the main focus for students coming in is developing the skills, the concepts, the pushing their creativity, gaining experience, so that they can find their own unique voice that does that, that's the number one thing. And then it's like, okay, how do we leverage that, and how do we scale the income, so that it's not $30,000 a year, it's 50, and then it's 100, or even like I've done really since 2005, I guess I've done over $200,000 a year in earnings as an artist.
Wow, that's all as an artist. That's incredible.
And it's actually changed. And like initially, it was mainly just on my originals, and then it was the originals and prints. And then it's been focused more on, and then it was dealing mainly selling through commercial galleries. But then I realized the same sort of thing that happened with the publishers. And I love my galleries, and the Gallery Hall did a great job. But when I got involved in social media, which was mainly to grow my YouTube channel so that I could have more impact on artists, it ended up really just growing my popularity as an artist. And I was getting all kinds of people responding to my posts saying, where can we buy your work? Or where can I buy this painting? And I would just refer them to the gallery, whichever one it was. And I realized after like about a year of this, it's like I'm giving them 40 to 50% because they're supposed to be doing the marketing, but I'm doing all the marketing. And so so that's like, okay, we should look at e-commerce. So then we looked at, again, building an e-commerce platform online, and gradually focusing more and more on direct to clients, to now I'm only in 2 galleries. And those are 2 of the very first galleries that I was with, and that they bet on me before I was a hot commodity. So I really feel loyal. It's like, okay, now that I'm doing very well, they're one of only 2 galleries you can go to get my work. The rest of it we do online. And then now the focus has been more on the art academy. So it's kind of like each one of those takes away from the other. So now, like I've been painting, we're doing an online sale in a couple weeks, which is mainly of my limited edition prints. But also I like to have some originals. So I kind of put my head down and been painting for the last 2 weeks. But other than that, I haven't painted since April, because all of the other, well, I've got my book. My book's coming out in November too, right? So that's kind of like each of those things takes away from the other. But I'm curious. Like when I see a new opportunity, that's like, oh, well, maybe I could self-publish, right? Maybe I could sell on my own. That takes more time away. Sometimes I look back to the days, there was about a 7-year period where all I did was go into my studio every day and paint for 5 or 6 hours, 5 or 6 days a week.
Oof.
And I could not keep up with the demand for my galleries. And that was my life, and it was very easy. And oh my God, I could be so selfish. And then I had, the whole getting into the teaching thing. I had a show in Toronto, one of the top galleries in Toronto. And this was back in about 2014, and it was like I'm sure when you were in art college taking graphic design, this is what you dreamed of. So I had a solo show that was opening that night. The gallery was opening at 7:00, and at 5:00 they closed the gallery, so that we could have an opening, right? And so then they got everything set up for the opening of the gallery. I was in the front window of the gallery, which is right on Yorkville Street, which is like, Fifth Avenue of New York kind of thing. I was in the gallery window painting, and like around 6:30, people started lining up at the gallery. And by the time they opened the doors, it was lined up down the street. The doors opened. People came in. They had someone there playing live music. There was waiters walking around with trays of wine, and red dots were going up on the paintings. And I was just kind of overcome. It's like, oh my God, this is it. This not only was the dream, this is so far beyond the dream. I mean, my dream, because I quit my job and walked away from my pension as a police officer when I was 40 to give this another try. My goal was, if I could ever just make as much as what I would have made had I stayed and gone on pension, then it'll be a wash, right? Well, I'd far surpassed that. But while I was in there, just kind of, and watching the sales go up, and I was mentally crunching the numbers because this was November, and I thought, holy, you know what? I'm going to make over $250,000 this year as an artist. And it just blew my mind. But very quickly, another feeling came over me, it was almost uncomfortable. And I didn't even at the time know what it was, but it basically was responsibility. It was that, like I said, I was not special. When I gave up on the dream of being an artist and joined the police force, everybody said, that's probably a good idea, right? You know, and when I quit my job and walked away from my pension, people thought I was crazy. And as I said, every group of artists I was ever among, there was always people who were much more naturally talented than me at that time. But I realized I know what I did to get here. And I pretty much guarantee every young artist who dreams of that type of moment and that type of life, they'd be willing to do the work to get there if they just knew what to do. Like, and I realized I know what they need to do. So that's what started me. The next day, I actually went down to Vistech, which is the big photography video store here in Toronto. It's like a huge kind of, tech warehouse thing. And I just went in and talked to the guys. And that's where I bought my printing equipment. So I knew their experts were really good. I just said, I want to start producing high quality YouTube videos. What do I need? Now, this was pre-smartphones, unfortunately. So I spent $25,000 on equipment to start my YouTube channel. But that was my whole thing. It was like, okay, I'm going to start giving back because I want to share kind of what I'd learned. And then I just realized, like I said, when I got sick, I just realized if I really want to have the most impact possible, I need to turn this into an actual business that's where I can dedicate most of my time on it. And then I also learned, I mean, you probably know this as well, that, people value what they pay for. So if people pay for a course or pay for a program, they're much more likely to actually take the course and then put it into action. And so all of that just convinced me that, okay, now I want to, spend most of my focus on the teaching side. And that's kind of where we've been for the last four years. And we just passed this summer, we just passed $500,000 in sales of my online courses, and we're going to hit 600,000 probably later this month. So, I mean,
nice. Congratulations.
It's going well.
That's awesome. Tell me a story about the getting into galleries.
Yep.
How tough is that?
That is very, very tough. And what galleries want. So again, we're talking about commercial galleries. So commercial gallery is a gallery where they make their money by actually selling artist work, and they pay the artist commissions, and that's how they make the work. I also really probably want to point out here, just in case there's any artists watching, there's another thing called vanity galleries. And they are something to be avoided at all costs. I used to get all these emails. It's like, oh, I won't say the name because I don't want to get sued, but we're a gallery in Chelsea, in New York, and we love your work, and we'd love to give you a show, and it's just going to cost you $5,000, right? And basically what you're doing, they're a gallery that makes their money by charging artists so that the artist can say, I had a show at this gallery. They don't bring any people into the gallery. But for a gallery to be an actual bona fide gallery, they will never ask an artist to pay to show there. They are only going to show artists that they know that their clients will buy. And so they know they're going to make money off you, or they feel very confident about that. So then the question becomes, well, how do you become one of those artists that they know?
How do you get known? That's a chicken egg scenario.
And so for me, I can tell you what happened. After I'd kind of developed the same sort of work that I do now, I sent a package out to about 20 galleries in the Southern Ontario area near Toronto of, I'm an artist, I'm looking for representation. There was like printed stuff. There was a CD. That was the way back then. It was before websites. And I'd be interested, in speaking to you about showing in your gallery. Nothing. Crickets. But at the same time, I was doing the art festival circuit. And those are the art festivals. Initially, it was the Binder Twine Festival, where it's like, it's farmers and everything, a little bit of arts and crafts. And you're spending $100 to kind of get your booth, and then gradually kind of moving up. And that's what I suggest anyone starting. Now, start at the lowest level and keep your prices low. And as your work gets better, as you get more sales, you start moving up and up. But I was doing at that time, probably about 14 art festivals a summer, and legitimate art festivals, but where I was spending $300 to $500 for my space. I had my tent set up, and I would do maybe $4,000 on a good weekend in sales. And then when I did the very first piece that fall that was in the voice of the way that I paint now, which is I'm known for is the sun kind of coming through the trees. I did my first painting that you could look at now and go, yeah, that stands up to everything I've done since. And that was back in 2004. And I was at a festival, and literally 5 minutes after the gates opened, a couple bought that painting. And at that time I was all over the map because I was trying everything, right? So that's another thing I'll get into later with artists is don't pick a niche. Don't until you're doing the work that people love. But anyways, that painting just like sold right away. And then I could have sold it 20 times in the next hour. Everybody came in and just like, oh my God, it's sold. Oh, and then they just leave. They wouldn't even look at the work that I had, right? They were so disappointed. So I finally, like this couple said, can we leave it here and come back? Because we just got here and we want that one, but we're going to walk around. So I took it down and wrapped it up. So no one else would see it so that people would look at my other work. But after that, I went home and I was going into a charity fundraising auction for the Burlington Art Center here just in Toronto. And so I submitted 2 paintings in this new style there as well. And at the time I was already in a couple local galleries, and both those pieces that I submitted sold for more than double of what my galleries were charging for my work. And so that made me think, okay, I think this is something. And I loved that painting more than anything I'd done. And I loved the process of painting it more than anything I'd ever done before. So then one of my local gallery owners who'd seen this work really convinced me to there's a big show in Toronto. It was the biggest art festival. It's called the Toronto Indoor Art Expo. But now we're talking about $5,000 for your booth space, for a 4-day festival. Okay. And he was really hot to trot on my new work too. And he's like, you got to get this out there. So I signed up for the festival. It's like, okay, cross my fingers. I put my head down for 2 months and just cranked out a ton of work in this new style. And it was still evolving at the time too, but it was all kind of similar work, cohesive. And when I had enough paintings to fill my booth twice because he said you're going to sell like hotcakes. So it's like, okay, I want to replace it. And I had a big booth. Anyways, the show opened at 11 o'clock on Thursday morning. By noon, I'd made back my $5,000 booth fee. By the time my wife got down there for the opening night at 5 o'clock, I was at 10,000 in sales, and we did 18,000 in sales on the opening day. And I was back to my car every hour to get more work. I ended up doing $28,000 in sales over the course of the weekend, and only because I'd kind of run out of all the A quality stuff. I was going back on the Sunday. I went back digging through my basement for works that I wasn't embarrassed of that I could still put up there. But I also had at the end of that art festival, the business cards of 10 gallery owners who said, would you please consider showing with us? So that's a long answer to the question. The way you get into commercial galleries is to demonstrate to them that you have an audience out there that will buy your work, or that people love your work enough to buy it. And so the art festival route is a great way. Social media is another great way. Like Brooke, the artist that I talked about, she's not in any galleries because she can't keep up with the demand from her collectors. She just sells directly. But if she wanted to get into a gallery, she would have galleries just begging to have her, right? Because she brings all of that. She brings her whole following. If she was to have, she's only ever had one gallery show in her life. And that was I ran my own gallery for about 4 years before COVID hit. And we decided, okay, let's just shut this down. But it was only a gallery of my work, and it was very successful. And she's the only artist that I ever had another show of. But I actually said to her, okay, it's time to repay me. And by that time she had a couple 100,000 followers, right? So it's like, okay, I want you to promote your show at my gallery, right? And I also took a commission off her work, but it was mainly for me to get my gallery on the map more. But the way that you get into galleries, a gallery is not very likely to invest in the potential of someone as an artist. It's like you, first of all, need to spend the time to create work that garners that type of a connection and response from the public. And then you need to be able to demonstrate to the gallery that, yes, it's a real thing. And then you beat them off with a stick. Like I was in 13 galleries, but I probably over the course of the time that I was really, really active painting and doing social media, really just promoting my work, I would get 10, a dozen requests a year from galleries wanting to carry my work. And it's like, no, you can only service so many galleries, right? And especially at that time, they were selling my prints, but they also expected a certain amount of originals a year. And it's like, there's only so much I could paint. But that's the thing. And so I really recommend for artists between social media and doing art festivals, because the other thing about both of those things is that's also how you can gauge the public's response to your work. Because you need to get three things to have a successful career. You need to love the process of creating the work that you create, whatever that process is of doing it. You need to love and be proud of the work that you can stand up and say, yes, this is what I do. But as importantly, and the thing that most artists don't consider, is you need to have enough of the public love your work that they are going to create a demand that you are not going to be able to keep up to, which just keeps causing the prices to go up and up. And so it's like, well, you're not just going to fall on, this is my style, I'm going to do it. It's an evolutionary process, right? It took me 5 years of painting full time to develop what eventually became my voice. But by being out there and doing the art festivals, like, I could gauge, what do I love in terms of the process? What do I love in terms of the finished work? But I was getting every couple of weeks feedback from the public about what they loved. And so it's like, okay, well, wherever that lined up with what I love doing, it's like, okay, I should maybe dig deep here and then see where that leads, right? And so by doing that, it's that constant kind of monitoring those three things. It's kind of guideposts of guiding you. This is kind of, this ties into what I really love to do, but which also seems to have found an audience that is really connecting with it. And most importantly, they don't just say, I love it, they get out their wallets, right? So
that's the important part.
That's the important. Unless there's no, I should say too, though, a lot of people say, well, I don't want to sell my art. And it's like, that's fine. Like, then it's a hobby, and then it's great. And then you don't need to worry about any of this stuff. But for me, the reason I left the police force was that I realized that what I really loved in more than anything else was painting. And there was about a 10-year period where I didn't paint at all. And then I just realized, okay, I want to spend my life being able to go in my studio and paint every day. I can either wait for retirement, which would have happened around now. I've been doing this now full time for 25 years. Or it's like, well, I was already married to my wife, who had a very good job, but was not rich. Because the options are, marry someone who's wealthy, who's going to support you in just going into your studio painting, win the lottery, or figure out a way that you can actually make a living by going in and doing what you love to do. And then you not only will be able to go in and paint every day, you'll be required to. I mean, there were times of, sometimes you get a bit of a spell where it's like, okay, I'm burned out. Maybe I need a day or two off. And, my wife would go like, it's noon on this, like, because I would paint. When I left the police force, we had 2 young boys at home. So I was their main caregiver during Monday to Friday. And my wife had a very good job with one of the banks. And so she would be gone all day at work. But on the weekends, those were days that those were the days that I could get in there and paint for 6 hours. And, I can remember having coffee, on a Saturday morning, kind of watching TV or whatever. And it's like 11 o'clock. And my wife would be like, hey, get in there and paint. Like,
Work.
Yeah. So it's not even just that you get to do it, but it becomes a requirement. And then you got your galleries emailing you saying, oh, well, we've sold 4 pieces this week and we've only got 2 left. When can we get some more? And that's why it's so important that you love what you're doing. Because I did have a couple times where I kind of fell upon a certain technique, style, kind of process where, wow, the public really went crazy over it, but I didn't love it. And it's like, well, I already had a job that I was good at. I didn't trade that to let this turn into a job. And if you don't love it, you're not going to want to go into the studio and just create the volume of work that's necessary to feed, as my wife used to say, get in there and feed the wood chipper. That's what she used to call the galleries, right?
Oh,
Because as fast as I could send them out, they would sell them. And it's like, get in there. It's, it's like, I think Bill Burr talks about, the Jackson Five and they're with their dad saying, get in there and write songs,
good. Sing.
It's the same kind of thing. So it's got to be careful what you wish for. But yeah, it's, that was kind of my life now then. And like I say, now it's more focused on the teaching. And I'm living my dream life. We just moved into our dream home. I'm up just north of Toronto. So we're on one of Canada's top golf courses in a golf community on Georgian Bay, Cobble Beach. So in the summer, I golf a lot, but now that that's winding down, like I said, I've been back in the studio for the last couple of weeks. But I mean, typically in the summer, I might work a dozen or 16 hours a week, and mainly it's on the Art Academy. And then in the wintertime, that's when I really get into painting, creating more courses,
All right.
and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's been a very good life.
That is incredible. Tell me a story about the number of people percentage-wise that say, like, yes, I'm going to make a living doing this, and how many of them actually do, regardless of the level of living that they're making?
Less than 10%.
Okay.
In a recent study, 20% of artists made less than $10,000 a year, and half of them made less than $5,000. So the vast majority, if they were depending on, and these are people who considered themselves full-time artists. Now, they probably had part-time jobs, or they had spouses who were kind of paying the bills, but the vast majority don't. And it's kind of like becoming a professional athlete or professional singer, right? Like, you can become very good, but there's a difference between that and making a living or being Taylor Swift, right? Where, I think last year, one of every 16 songs downloaded on the internet was a Taylor Swift song.
Oh my God. Surreal statistics. Yeah.
But you don't have to be quite that good. But there is the thing called the Pareto effect, right? Which is that a small percentage of people are responsible for the majority of outcomes. Doesn't matter what you look at, whether it's authors, whether it's PhDs in terms of papers they write, whatever. And that it can be, sometimes it's referred to as the 80-20, but more often it's kind of like the square root. So it'd be like, if you go to an art festival and there's 100 artists showing there, those top 10 artists, their total sales are going to be equal to the other 90.
Sure.
And it's not a curve. It kind of is a flat line, and then it goes up.
Hockey stick, yeah.
Yeah. So and I'm a Canadian, right? So it's like, you got to get off the blade onto the shaft. But the reason most artists don't get to make a living, it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're not trying hard enough. It's because they don't know what it is they should be doing, because they're confused about, which village they're in and what actually do they need to do to succeed there. It's because I believe if someone has a passion for art, and so by passion, it's not just loving the thing. My wife gets mad at me when I'm going to do this again too. I use her as an example for golf. Like, she golfs about 90 rounds a year, and she's still a 25 handicap because she just really enjoys going out there playing okay golf, where she's pretty much a bogey golfer, right? For it to be a passion, you not only need to love doing the thing, you have to have an overwhelming, burning desire to master everything about it. And you need to be willing to do the work to actually achieve that. And if you have that, as long as you've got a work ethic and you've got a willingness to learn, but you've got a plan in terms of, okay, where do I focus that effort? I believe 100% that anyone can actually reach the point where they can become a successful artist. And the main reason is, first of all, most artists don't know what they need to do. Also, the majority of them just aren't willing to work hard enough. Most of them will give up. Most of your competition is going to give up, right? But if you're willing to do it and you've got that burning desire and you've got that passion, it totally is, like I say, not only doable. The thing that actually got me to quit my job as a police officer and to get back into art, I read an article by Harley Brown. It was an interview with Harley Brown. He's a fairly well-known Canadian artist. And he used to have a monthly column in the International Artist magazine. But they were asking him about success and talent. And he said, talent is a myth. Talent's just your skills knowledge, experience, and creativity. They can all be improved upon. And he said, if you have the desire and are willing to do the work, I guarantee you can be successful. And he said, he said, not 98% sure, 100%. And at the time, I was an artist who was not painting because I'd given up on the dream, because I decided I wasn't talented enough. And I thought, my initial reaction was, to heck with you, Harley Brown. I bet you're one of those gifted people. They all say that. But they all say it was just hard work. But the rest of us know there was some pixie dust that got sprinkled on you at birth, and that's why you're successful. And it really hurt me because I realized, I gave up on my dream like 15 years ago, and it kind of put it aside. And what he's saying is like, well, maybe if I'd stuck with it, I could be living my dream life now instead of, I was doing a job I liked. I was very good at being a police officer. I enjoyed the job, but I didn't love it. And a little voice in the back of my head said, well, what if he's right? What if he is right? Like, I'm only 35, maybe. So I decided I'm not fully bought into this whole growth mindset kind of thing, but I'm going to live my life for a year as though I believe it. And so that meant for me a few things. That meant, and I'd heard that, you need to paint at least 3 times a week if you want to improve, because it's just like going to the gym. You can't go once a month and work out for 3 hours and expect to get any result. It's that cumulative kind of effect. Mm-hmm. So I started scheduling my painting time first. I also started looking at what are the things I'm not good at. I sucked at composition, the way in which we arrange the shapes on a painting to create a visual dance for the viewer's eye. So I dug deep into kind of learning that. Just anything that I knew that was a weakness that up until then, even when I painted on my vacation, I'd avoid certain things. I dove into them to kind of make them my strengths. And within a year, I had gotten a lot better. And I was now getting work into juried shows. I won an award. People, all of a sudden, I was starting to, every year I'd have like an open house, just friends and family, and they would come and buy my work. And we went from, I remember in 1997, I was having success as kind of as a side hustle, kind of as a hobbyist artist. And I'd won some awards. I'd been in some prestigious shows. I was getting commissions. I was doing a lot of high realism portraits at the time. And my wife said to me, like, I'm so proud of you. This is great. But we have 2 young kids and they're going to be going to university. And please don't ever come to me and tell me you want to quit your job to paint full time, because that wasn't the deal. When we got married, she didn't even know about my art background, right? I was just a police officer. And then by 1999, I'd just been elected to the Canadian Society of Painters and Watercolor. I was elected a senior signature member of the Canadian Institute of Portrait Artists. I'd just gotten into the biggest juried show Canada had ever held, the Millennium show by the Federation of Canadian Artists. And I had about 15 portrait commissions waiting to do. We just had a studio open house where I sold all kinds of work. And then my wife said to me after the show, after everybody left and we were cleaning up, she's like, okay, you need to sit down and we need to talk. And I thought, oh no, right? Because when you see that in the movies, it never ends up good, right?
Yeah, we need to talk is not a good thing that you want to hear. No.
But anyways, what she said, we need to talk not about if you leave the police force to paint full time, but when you leave the police force to paint full time. And so this was in October of 1999. And it's like, well, there's a new millennium starting in 2 months, right? But then she said something that was really important. And I also think that was been really key to my success. So my wife was a banker. So I'm the dreamer. She's the down-to-earth practical one, right? And she said, I believe that this is maybe what we should be doing, but not so that you can be fulfilled. She said, I'm more concerned about the long-term economic well-being of our family. And I think we might be better served by you pursuing art full-time, based on what I'd already shown her over the previous 5 years when I got serious about it. And so then she said, so I'm okay with you quitting your job and starting as a full-time artist in 2000, January 1st, as long as you'll commit to me now. If it ever becomes clear this is not in our best long-term interest, you'll put on a suit and go back and get a regular job. And at that time, I was a detective in the commercial crime unit, our fraud squad. So I was investigating frauds over $2 million. I'd had the month-long computer crime course at the RCMP College in Ottawa. So I had a set of skills that was in really high demand in the corporate world. We were losing probably 5 people a year from my office that were quitting and cashing in their pension to go work in the private sector.
Mm.
So I knew that I had that to fall back on. Luckily, I didn't have to, but it was close. The first, I probably had about a 2-year grace period. And then by year 3, it was kind of like, okay, I'm still struggling here. I'm making $20,000 a year. There was always a little bit of progress, but there were a number of times where I thought, oh, we're going to have the talk soon. And then I'd have like 4 sales, of work. But then once that show at the Toronto Art Expo where I did 28,000 in the weekend, I can still remember driving home the opening night where I did 18,000 in sales. And I just said, she was driving because I'd had a couple of drinkies, as you can imagine, right? After 5 years and this happens. I said, remember this night, remember this moment. This was the day that our lives changed. And like she said to me, always the practical one, you can't be so sure of that. And I said, no, after what we saw today, like we're never ever going to even have the conversation about, was it a good idea for me to quit the police force? And we're certainly never going to have the conversation about, gee, maybe now it's time to talk about getting another job. And that literally was, like I say, that after that show, I ended up picking up like 3 galleries that I decided to go with. And then I continued doing festivals for a number of years. And then my earnings just went from, like, the year before that was about 25,000. And then that year, I think I did 40. And then the next year it was like 60 and then 80. And then I just kept going up, because as more and more people see the work and they all have that reaction and you can't keep up with the demand, the only way to slow down the sales is raise the prices.
Price, yeah.
So I really didn't do anything different business wise to go from like $35,000 a year up until I hit like $150,000 a year, other than just raising the price as the demand kept going up. And then we got into scaling with the limited edition prints, right? And so then that was a big thing. And then we started selling online, and now there's the Art Academy. Now I got my book coming out. So, yeah, because I did realize at a certain point, the painting is great, but it's a hamster wheel. As soon as you stop running on that wheel, the tap of money shuts off. And so pretty early on, I got into the whole kind of self-publishing. And then just as technology is making everything so more, everything is kind of like what printing was, right? Where you needed to have a huge investment of cash and expertise to be able to do the things that would scale your work. Well, now you can do them yourself. And so it's the same even with the publishing. Like, we're self-publishing this through Amazon Kindle, right? It's of course, that's a whole other 6 months of my life spent, first of all, writing and rewriting and then learning about that. But I also find I'm a voracious learner too. So when I see something new that it's like, oh, well, maybe look into it, see if it makes sense. And then it's like, yeah, let's do that. And I guess I'd just say the other reason too why some days I look back and I think, oh, maybe I should have just stayed just painting in my studio every day and not having to worry about any of all this other stuff. But my son started working for me part-time when he was in college. So I taught him how to do the printing and the publishing. So now he was in his summers, he would spend the whole summer printing and creating inventory, so that I didn't have to do that and I could paint. And then when he graduated university, then he was also helping with social media, filming and editing videos and kind of taking the photos and doing the posts and all that kind of stuff. And so that was just part-time. And then when he finished university, I asked him, I said, like, if you want, do whatever you want, but if you want to kind of work in the business, then I'll work to creating an evergreen business here that you're going to be able to carry on with long after I'm gone. And so that was when we really got heavily into the self-publishing. And then now with the Art Academy, because even though I do I have my mastermind where we do the weekly calls, 80% of the income comes off people just purchasing the courses that I don't have to do anything with, right? It's just the recorded courses. And then now we've got the book coming out. So I feel that's what keeps me going in terms of, okay, how many different revenue streams can we create that are going to be evergreen, that aren't going to require me to keep running on the hamster wheel, so that he's going to be able to continue with this business long after I'm gone.
Sure. Tell me a story about the Art Academy. You essentially systematized becoming a professional artist.
Yep.
How difficult was it to just sit down and say, like, okay, how do you become a professional artist?
It was pretty easy, actually, because I knew the steps, which, I mean, I guess that helps with me being a fraud investigator, right? Is kind of like examining a lot of stuff and data. And when I looked at becoming a full-time artist, that was the first thing I did was I studied the careers of successful artists and studied like what had they done, what was the path, what were the commonalities. And what I found was it's really no different than any of the pretty much anything else, but even some of the creative stuff is like the very first thing is you need to master the skills and the concepts, right? You need to master drawing, you need to master composition, you need to master light and shadow, you need to master color theory, perspective, positive and negative shapes. So like that's the way I structured the course. The whole part of my teaching, the first part of it is really about, first of all, equipping them with the skills and the knowledge in terms of creating art that you can now take. And now then the next stage is like what separates all the artists that are really successful is they have a unique voice, right? It's the same as music, right? I mean, I love watching American Idol. I love watching The Voice, but there are a ton of artists that get up there that they sing, they're technically perfect, but it's like, yeah, you sound like they have 5 people like that every season on there. But then you'll hear someone that it's like, oh my God, like I would know that voice as soon as I heard it. So then it was like, okay, once you've developed all the skills, what's the process by which you then go on this journey to find your own unique voice? And I've systematized that. And I'll tell it to your viewers too. And it's actually the same as what people do in music, right? If you want to become a successful musician, have a band, whatever, you don't just go in your room and start trying to write music and figure out how you play this thing called the guitar, right? You learn the skills, but then you play the music of a ton of other people. And you learn how to play, rock and roll and country and all of this kind of stuff. And then you're listening to, well, what do I really love doing? And then once you've mastered the ability to kind of, all of these influences, then you go, okay, well, let me see what I can do. And that's what I tell my artists to do is look for work that just reaches out and makes you just go, oh my God, look at this, right? Just stops you in your track. Well, an artist that does that kind of work, that's someone you want to use as an influence. And so then what you want to do is examine them very, very closely. It's like, what's the filter that they use to translate the real world to their art, right? So like an easy one I say to people is Vincent van Gogh, because everybody knows that. He took the real world, but he put it on canvas just in strokes of individual color, broken color, to create a representation of that was his filter. So it's like what I would suggest people do. Okay, first of all, you've mentally kind of figured out that's the filter. Now go try and do that. If you're really just starting out, there's nothing wrong with copying an artist's painting, as long as you know that for copyright reasons, you're only allowed to do it for learning purposes or for enjoyment, right? You can't sell it. You can't post it. You can't do anything with it. It just basically stays in your home. You can give it to your mom, whatever. But then what you need to do is find your own subject matter that you want to paint, and then try to replicate that process and those techniques so that you can create as though Vincent van Gogh was painting this painting, right? And then once you've learned all that you need to learn there, and what you're doing is you're learning a bunch of different techniques. You're really pushing your creativity and trying to see the world in a different way. You're really broadening your experiences. And you're learning about what you like to do and what you like in terms of the outcome. Then go do it with another influence and another one and another one and another one. And then once you've done it with a bunch of influences, and hopefully influences that are very different, then you just go into pure process mode where it's like, okay, now I've added all of this extra tools to my artistic belt. Now I'm going to go in the studio and just paint something I want to paint, but I'm going to draw on all of this stuff. And I'm going to play the what if game. What if I started it like this artist, but then what if I came in and did this? And what if I did that? And when you're in process mode, the most important thing to understand is that because you're doing something you don't know how to do, you're very likely to fail. You're going to create a lot of paintings that don't work out. And this is also where a lot of artists get in trouble, right? Because they say, well, I'm going to try something new. And they go and they try and it doesn't work out. So they kind of scurry back to their comfort zone. Then they see something else. Oh, I'm going to try this. And it doesn't work out. And they scurry back to their comfort zone. Now, just the thought of trying something new, that gets the lizard brain kind of going, right? Because now you're experiencing the fear of failure. All of a sudden, the amygdala kicks in. You get stressed, you get a panic. And so what do? They stay in their comfort zone for the rest of their life and they never grow. So the key to understand is when you're in process mode, the very first thing you do is recognize I'm in process mode. And the first thing I do is give permission for this painting to fail. That the intent here is not to create a finished painting. The intent is to try the thing, whatever it is, and then learn from that. And that way, when you create the worst painting you've ever created in your life, that was a successful day. You did the thing. Because here's the other thing about painting, it's not just knowing about what to do, it's knowing about what not to do. And when you have a painting that, the worst, I always said to my students, I would rather have a spectacular failure than a mediocre success, as a painting. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I would rather have a painting that was on its way to becoming what I thought this might be one of the best paintings I've ever done. And then I take it into the ditch. I would rather have that than just have a painting go really well and go, yeah, that's another good version of what I do. And they were like, why? I said, well, because I didn't learn anything in the one that just went well. But I know at the very least what not to do next time. But then here's the whole key about that process mode too. That's where breakthroughs happen. So you're going to have, and that's also why I recommend you master all the skills and the concepts first. Because if you do that, you're still going to be creating a lot of work that's sellable. Because you've mastered the skills, you've mastered the concepts, you've got a good composition. If you're just in there in process mode pushing paint around, you could just be creating bad paintings for the next 50 years, right? But when you're in process mode, that's where all of a sudden you create a painting, which was for me, that one called Forest Window, where it was like, oh my God, I think this is something special. And then you revert back into product mode. So product mode is where we just stick with the skills, the mediums, the techniques, the things that we're competent and confident in. And if you stick with those, whatever the bar is for a good painting for you, you should hit it every time. But if you just stick there, that bar won't move in 20 years, 30 years. You just might get a little faster at producing it. And so that's why it's so important to go into process mode. And then the other mode is practice mode. That's like life drawing. It's like doing the daily sketchbook. It's just doing color swatch drills to mix color. There's no intent for a painting. You're just doing drills to kind of nail a skill. But you constantly go through all three of these different modes of painting. And if you're doing that and you're gauging your reaction to how much you love doing this, how much you love the painting and how much the public loves it, then when you hit that, now we have business solutions and problems. And until you hit that, there's a lot of artists that are like, it breaks my heart because I see all these people out there selling artist marketing programs, how to market your art, it's like until you hit that place, you don't have a marketing problem, you have an art problem. And there's no amount of business solutions that are going to fix an art problem. So my whole teaching is, first of all, let's solve the art problem. Let's find out whatever your voice is going to be. Let's get you there. I've had one of my students, she found it in a year and she took off even more than Brooke. Her name's Emily Valentine and she's just killing it. Took me 5 years of doing that to find my voice. But then once you've got that, now actually we can use business solutions to scale your earnings. Again, whether it's going through galleries, whether it's publishing, all kinds of things, right? But yeah, so that's how I structured the academy. Was first of all, let's deal on from the very beginning. And I structured it to in an order that I love. I think it's Ferris talks about dominoes. Like what's the biggest domino if you knocked it over right now would have the biggest impact on everything you do now and going forward. So that's how I structured my course with like the biggest dominoes. I mean, the first one is mindset. Second one is understanding the art world in the different villages. Then it's drawing, composition, and then eventually going in process. And then, okay, now it's selling your work. Then it's, all that kind of stuff. So I looked at every artist that I know that's successful and even historical. That's the path that they took. So
I
I
love
just
it.
figured
I
that,
love it.
yeah.
That is cool. Systematize everything. And it's so interesting to hear someone that I'm trying to think what professor said this, because we were in graphic design. The students that I was with were in graphic design at the time. There were other students that were going for fine art, and they looked down on
Hmm.
the graphic design people. And I had one of my professors that was like, "These people are dumb because they're going to school for fine art with the hopes
Yeah.
that they're going to be able to sell their fine art,
Yep.
and they're looking down at us because we're in essentially art that we're just saying, yeah, we're going to help people sell stuff, so we're going to get paid for it."
But not
It's like
only
we're all in the
that,
same game.
I don't know what it's like down in the US, but so we have our most famous group of artists called the Group of Seven that they were like our impressionists. And they are the most famous artists in Canada. It was around the 1900s. And they were all graphic designers
Ah.
initially, because in graphic design, it was all about skill,
Mm-hmm.
right? It wasn't about what you feel. Right. It was, first of all, you need to draw, you need to understand color, you need to understand
Yeah. Get
design,
the emotion moving.
all of the things that go into creating great art in the village of commercial sales, because the average person still appreciates that. They might go to a museum or a public gallery and politely nod at a banana duct tape to the wall. But when it comes to buying art they're going to hang in their house, they're buying art that makes them feel something they want to feel. And for the majority of people, it's all of those things I talked. It's all of the stuff that was important in art up until the 1950s. And for most people, that's still what's important when they're. It kills me to see people say, oh, I don't know anything about art, but I know what I like. And I'm thinking, how have we let these Poindexters take over art like that, right? There's no other thing where we let people tell us what we should like, right? If you're a restaurant critic and you're pushing food that no one likes, you're not going to be a restaurant critic very long, because the whole idea of critics is, it never was to tell us what we should like. It was to be someone who could vet all of the stuff out there and based on what we like, say, well, you'll probably like this, right? That's what music critics do. That's what restaurant critics do. What do art critics do? No, they tell you what you should like. And it's like, we let them take over. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why that art was traditionally only for the people with a lot of money.
Right.
And then once all this nonsense started happening in the 50s and 60s, the average person just said, well, I don't know. So turned their backs on it. Politicians just handed over the keys to all the grants and funding and all that. Well, it's like they're university professors. I guess they know what they're talking about. Right. But for the average public and for the average artist, I don't think most people that end up going to take a fine art degree or graphic design is because you fell in love with drawing. You fell in love with painting and you thought, what's the only way I can make a living that takes advantage of that thing I love? And so the great message out there for artists is, if you just want to create work that shows mastery of skill, mastery of concepts, and create beautiful work that people just really want to enjoy and make their homes better, and it just engages them in a way that they love, there is definitely a place. And that's where the majority of commerce that goes on in art goes on.
Fair. I love it. Tim, where can people find you?
Okay, so my art academy is at www.timpackerartacademy.com. And if they go there, they can also, right on the homepage, I've got my new book coming out, You Can Sell Your Art, which is a step-by-step guide to creating a livable income from your art. If they go to the Tim Packer Art Academy website, they can also give us their email, and we'll send them 5 chapters for the book absolutely free.
Nice.
So the book has 38 chapters. It covers everything that I talked about, from kind of just thinking, I like art and I'd like to make a living. What are some of the things you need to know, right up to the end to getting to the point where you can make a decent living. And they're not the first 5 chapters. It's the 5 chapters that I think would have the most impact if that's all someone read. So even within the 5 chapters that they can get for free, there's information there that I guarantee is going to clarify some of this murkiness about, what's involved in making a living for an artist and what should I be focusing on.
Nice. I love it. Tim, thank you so much for being on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This has been Authentic Business Adventures, the business program that brings you the struggle stories and triumphant successes of business owners across the land. My name is James Cademan, and Authentic Business Adventures is brought to you by Calls on Call, offering call answering and receptionist services for service businesses across the country, on the web at callsoncall.com. And of course, the Bold Business Book, a book for the entrepreneur in all of us, available wherever fine books are sold. If you're listening or watching this on the web, if you could do us a huge favor, give us a big old thumbs up, subscribe, and of course, share it with your entrepreneurial friends and those friends that deep down inside, you know, have that little artist brain that's got to get out. Because
there's a lot of us.
Yeah, maybe they're stuck in that job, that little 9-to-5 thing that they I always think of the movie Up in the Air. And I can't think of the actor's name. There's George Clooney and this other guy. And George Clooney asked the question of the guy, how much did they offer you to give up on your dreams?
Yeah.
And the guy went to school to be a chef or something like that. The guy's like, $30,000.
Well, the thing too about with art is it's like most of us get that desire kind of figurative or, metaphorically beat out of us.
Yeah,
as
squash,
kids.
tuck that under the rug.
It's like, you can't make a living as an artist. You can't do this. You can't. And then we end up, it's like, well, maybe I'll be an architect. I'll do landscape architecture. I'll be a graphic designer. I'll do something where it at least has something to do with that. But the thought, like when I was a kid, I didn't even know what I do now was a thing. I didn't think you could go into your studio, just paint work that you wanted to paint and make a very good living from that, right? No one was teaching us that. Like the fine art people, because they were not concerned about sales, right? They were concerned about how you feel and what is, how is this expressing, the angst against, late stage capitalism and criticizing society and kind of all of this kind of stuff that was going in the, for the academic kind of thing. But they weren't teaching them to say, well, to be able to create great work that people are going to want to buy and hang in their homes. That was not the thing. But the thing is, that is the majority of commerce that goes on with art. And that is the thing that all of us, when we started out as kids, I think it's like if you said, of all those villages I suggested, which one would you like to be in? And I think most of them would be, well, yeah, what that guy's doing. I want to be able to go in my studio and paint work and have an army of people love my work, pay me money, and then treat almost like rock stars.
Doesn't sound terrible. Sounds like a pretty sweet life.
I've been out. I remember I went to a Matchbox 20 concert, one of my favorite bands that I like to listen to when I'm painting. And I went there with my wife and my sister-in-law and a bunch of friends. And so we were in the line and, we're going to refill our water bottles. And there was a woman there and she didn't figure out where the button was to press. And I was like, oh, you just need to press this button. And she turned around. She said, thank you. And then she went, oh my God, are you Tim Packer? Doesn't happen all the time, but it happens often enough. And of course, I was just like, oh, I love this. And my wife just hates that, right? Because she's like, he's got a big enough head as it is. And so she was like, oh my God, can I give you a hug? I love your work. And I follow you on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. And I went back and my wife was like, don't even say it. Right, but it is kind of cool, right?
They don't do that with bankers, do they?
No, they don't.
That's awesome. Tim, thank you so much for being on the show. Let's see here. Past episodes can be found morning, noon, and night. The podcast link found at drawincustomers.com. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next week. I want you to stay awesome. And if you do nothing else, enjoy your business.